It's a great pleasure for us to introduce to you Petra Blaisse. Petra is, on the one hand, needs no introduction, and yet I'll persist, and we'll say that she, among other things, has an extraordinary international practice. Her firm is called Inside Outside. You may have seen her recent publication from the NAI of a monograph of her work. Petra's background in the design arts really transcends disciplinary description. She's had a range of experiences, beginning in the curatorial arts, dealing with the so-called applied arts. And I've come to think of her work and the work of Inside Outside as revivifying and embodying a tradition, a European tradition in particular, of the applied arts dealing both with textiles and fabrics, but also with the gardening arts. And in that regard, I think Petra and Inside Outside are really a singularity in the world of design today. You will have seen her work in a range of cultural and institutional venues, dealing both with the interior characterization of otherwise fairly tough modern spaces through the use of fabrics and textiles, and her work in the garden in a range of installations, the Kunst in Rotterdam, for example, among them. In North America, you've seen her work at the Seattle Public Library, at the IIT Student Center, among other things. She's here today discussing with us what I hope will be a commission for Piper Auditorium. So I'll leave Petra and Moisen to say more about that. It's really an extraordinary honor to have you with us here today, Petra. So thanks.
Thanks, Charles. I'm honored to be here, of course, because Harvard is also quite known. Much more known.
So you make it more famous.
Well, I'm happy you're here, and I can measure your character and your talents through the way you eat your lunch, so it's always interesting. I usually give a talk. Partly I read a text I wrote, and partly I will go into certain projects. And you are most welcome to interrupt or to ask questions or to comment. But I'll start with reading a text. And while I read the text, I go through images that are not necessarily, they're going quite quickly. They're more symbol of what we're doing than that I want you to see everything at length. Ladies and gentlemen, it all started when, after studying art and design and working at the Museum of Modern Art in Amsterdam, as Charles already described, I think, for many years at the Applied Arts Department, I started working as independent exhibition, interior and garden designer from 1987 onward under the name of Inside Outside Petra Blaisse. Working from home, on site and at improvised desks in the offices of the architects and art institutions, I worked with archives and tools stored in the trunk. I worked with archives and tools stored in the trunk of my old car for 11 years. And I was lucky to find 2 empty, spacious classrooms for rent in an old school building in Amsterdam in December of 1998. But before that, I worked with OMA on the Dance Theatre in The Hague, where actually my first architectural project, where I designed the stage curtains, my first stage curtains, already kind of the illusion of light and space where there wasn't actually any. And of course, discovering all the ins and outs of theater curtains and public space, and always had a hobby for gardening and learned to garden, actually the work of the craft of gardening from an older woman with whom I developed a garden of 3 hectares in 1992 to 1991 to 1993, 2.5 years. And it was all in an anthropological way of gardening. So it means that you garden with the moon, the moon, the position of the moon, and the clarity of the moon, the fullness of the moon influence everything fluid, therefore also influence seeds and bulbs and plants and so on, each moment of the day. So this way of gardening was really interesting to me. I'm not at all an anthroposophical person, but it was very interesting to see that gardening with the moon is really having a very positive effect on plants and how they develop, and also in seeding and multiplying at certain moments of the day, even planting at certain moments of the day, have a very good influence. What I also learned, or tried to learn, because that's a science I'm still working on, is how planting groups, plants together, so in certain communities, has a good influence on each other. So you protect plants from illnesses and insects and what have you by planting them near to each other. So, and I worked with Yves Brunier on the Museum Park in Rotterdam, and with Rem Koolhaas, started in the early 90s when the Kunst Hall was built, and it's now being restored, so we're again working on it to see if things are going according to the original design of Yves Brunier, because he's actually the main designer there. I was only assisting, but I did some private gardens at the time, and also this one. But I won't go into all of these details. So, in fact, I found a space in an old school in Amsterdam, and from that time on, I was able to invite, to finally settle and invite people to join me in my adventures. Since then, Inside Outside has developed into a professional team of diverse disciplines, now consisting of about 10 to 12 people. An interior and graphic designer, alias cultural anthropologist, an interior architect and potter with a talent for economics, a fashion and costume designer, alias gardener, 2 architects and skilled model makers with love for music and the art of cooking, and 2 architects that perform Latin drum and Spanish dance in their free time. 4 landscape architects that also teach, write, practice the fencing sport and run families, a theater historian that takes care of our public relations, and an office manager that supports us in financial matters and that, with the help of our entire team, prepares warm lunches for us every single day of the week, which in Amsterdam and the Netherlands is pretty original, as we usually eat bread and cheese. But I think, I pay people so little that at least they have to eat very well. Because our profession, you can imagine, is not a very commercial one. And so we hire ourselves per project, and that is, of course, always risky business. As far as religious and cultural backgrounds is concerned, our team includes Christian, atheist, Jewish, Muslim, and Buddhist beliefs, while uniting North and Southern Europe, North and South America, the Far and the Middle East. Thus, the Inside-Outside team seems symbol for what our work is about: a perpetual search for new answers and solutions to often complex and demanding issues in the fields of interior and landscape architecture, practiced in many countries in service of many different clients and cultures. This is the wallpaper you talked about, Sanford. Vinyl wallpaper, a commission of the Wolf Gordon wallpaper firm a long time ago. Well, you see all kinds of things. We do small scale, large scale, interior. Hey, and here is Rosetta, still pregnant. But her child is already 2.5 by now. The book, by the way, is published in 2007 and has been reprinted in 2009 by Monacelli Press. So you see symbols of our kinds of work, and we do a lot in our studio. All the sample making is in our studio, and then we find firms to actually sew it in the real scale. Inside Outside is a design firm that addresses both the interior and exterior space, accepting commissions of small to very large scale, both within the Netherlands and internationally. We focus on the interaction with architecture and the intent of the architect, on sharing the initial speculative moments of a project and taking part in its development from beginning to end. Our work continuously anticipates various aspects of a project, from meaning to use, cultural or social expectation, and the economic and political context in which a project evolves. Therefore, our work runs parallel with the architectural process and takes between 6 months and 6 years to complete. Here we were in Peru in a conference about public space and the influence of art on public space, but also we had enormous discussions with specialists on the whole water household and the lack of water, of course, that Lima experiences. Our work is about the experience of space itself and exploring the connection between interior and exterior space. Of course, that's nothing new in modern architecture. We introduce movement through texture, light, sound, climate, color, and the orchestration of trajectories. We manipulate floors, walls, ceilings, facades, and furniture, and we create surroundings with inserted objects, layers, or plantings that trigger movement or move through space and time themselves. Both inside and out, we like to maintain the experience of a boundary and to create environments that are flexible, adaptable, and at times temporary. Here you see an image, it's also in the book, of a few of our tracks, and all to scale. So you can see it's from large to small and from straight to bent in all kinds of shapes. And here, paths. Paths also in scale to one another, so from large projects. At that time, I mean, we are already, of course, 5 years later now. Both inside and out, we like to manipulate the experience of boundary and to create environments that are flexible, adaptable, and at times temporary. This provisional quality is what the public responds to and what we try to defend. Therefore, the end result tends to be soft or suggest softness, to transmit or filter light, create shade or introduce darkness, to influence the acoustics and the viewer's perception of a space and its boundaries, responding to every change of context, private or public, and to take environmental issues into consideration wherever possible. In the end, our projects link, widen, limit, open up, divide, or multiply space, enriching it with a multitude of physical effects. Why gardens and curtains? Because they have something in common, I think. Both are defined by the elements, climate, time, growth, and finiteness, and both depend on the human touch. Both cannot be completely controlled. And that is precisely what we like, how this very unpredictability impacts the stable and often monotonous structures of our urbanized environment, how it counteracts the speed and money-driven development strategies of today. I wanted to show you these two projects. This is for Villa Manin. Francesco Bonami curated an exhibition and garden installation a few years ago in Codroipo, which is near Venice, during the Arts Biennale. And Inside Outside was asked, together with 8 other artists. We don't consider ourselves artists, but in this case, and in some cases, we are asked to do site-specific installations, so not permanent. And we were asked to make a pavilion in the gardens, while there was an exhibition inside by Caspar Koenig. Outside, there was this installation by many different artists. And we said, well, we are not architects and we're not artists, so we would like to make something more flexible. And what we did is we made in our studio 57 shading devices, which we called personal pavilions. And they are like sunglasses. You can look through, but they create shade. They are foldable. You can carry it around. And they have holes in them, and therefore they have organized views. And they also reflect the environment. So depending on the light and the position you are in, they have actually contain all the things that we think our work is about. And we combined them with a stainless steel flat, what we call drops in the landscape, especially in darker spaces that they lit up and showed you the way and created another dimension, as if, you know, if you look into them, the trees obviously grow in the other direction. We also made a site-specific installation last year in Madrid. There was a curator who came by and asked me to do an exhibition of our work in Madrid, and we said, well, instead of an exhibition, can we do a site-specific installation, because we like that much more. Because how do you show our work? I mean, the scale, we did it in Storefront Gallery, where we made a curtain that covered the entire facade, because otherwise nobody knew what the scale was, which is, you know, in that time was 15 meters by 30 meters. But it's hard to show, except certain circumstances. So she found a place, and she found a real fantastic place. It's called La Casa Encendida in Madrid, and it's a center for culture, education, and social issues. So they do exhibitions and concerts and so on, but they are also a social institute. Everyone goes there, old people, young people, artists, people who have no money. They have studios, sound studios, dance studios, etc., that you can just borrow. They have libraries, etc. And a roof garden, and nothing commercial. I mean, you can't buy anything there. You just go there with your picnic and you go up, and on the way you can see a lot of things. And so we liked that a lot. And I was teaching, working with architects of the architectural school there, university, and was interviewed by journalists, and weirdly enough they all spoke about Madrid as if it was the most ugly, dry desert city of Europe. Like, we don't have any green here, it's awful, you know. And I said, that's so strange, because as a tourist you really think it's really beautiful, you have old trees, it's all very green, and they absolutely were convinced that Madrid was dry and barren. And of course we researched the situation and discovered that actually Madrid is one of the very important migrating stops for migrating birds, and that many birds, and that around Madrid, that Madrid is actually in a kind of basin of a high mountainous surrounding. It's itself on 600 meters above sea level, and it has many conditions all around it, and all these conditions, both dry and humid and forest, and they all sort of slide into Madrid and influence Madrid in its climate. And so we took the bird as a metaphor, and we said the bird is the one that sees, the one, the neutral, the non-biased looker on, I don't know the English word. So we called the installation Con los ojos abiertos, meaning with your eyes open, or with the eyes open. And so we took the bird as the one that actually really understands Madrid's situation. And we made this shading device for the building through making these transparent birds, and also the other way around, making a transparent sunscreen with a opaque bird on top. When you are inside and you're studying there or you're working there, because the sun glides from one to the other side, those patches of birds just, you know, move through space. And unfortunately I don't have images, I only found these. This is of El País and nothing else, but you could imagine that these patches of birds just slide through the space and make people aware, you know, give the impression that a bird is actually passing by. We also made a carpet that starts at the entrance and goes through the entire building, not a real carpet, but a kind of, we call it loper, but it's a very thin carpet that goes over all the stairs.
A runner.
A runner. We created a runner that at a certain point goes up the wall and then over the ceiling and down again. And it leads you all the way to the roof garden, and that entire runner has the story of the birds and all the natural conditions of Madrid. So it was not meant as a moralistic installation, it was really meant as an eye-opener and making people aware. So there was also a big map in the middle of the building with big pens and felt pens, a map of Madrid with lots of questions and the whole mind map of this exhibition. And people during this installation wrote down a lot of comments and questions, and it was very well received. But in any case, you know, talking about landscape through textiles through textile medium was actually what it physically was. The curtain, in its traditional role, had an enormous responsibility, identifying private space and protecting the human from natural forces. It became a tool to prevent cold, light, and the human gaze to enter the built interior space. In Western society, these performances have gradually been taken over by electricity and other technologies. The curtain could emancipate, shed former utilitarian duties, and discover new roles in new conditions. I dare to state that Inside Outside has helped the curtain to emancipate from its traditional responsibilities, to discover entirely new roles. One important tool to achieve this is the form of the track. The track, like the path in our gardens, choreographs movement and thus leads the curtain in, out, and through space, changing its appearance and effect with the speed with which it moves, and detaching it from the architectural form itself. The curtain thus becomes a personality of its own, invading, inhabiting, and deserting a space, opening it up, dividing or multiplying it. A curtain can be silent, restrained, noisy, elegant, overwhelming, blunt, or breakable, but it can at any given time diminish or expand its volume, undulate or stretch, fold, pleat, roll or shift, flutter or wallop, reflect, absorb, or radiate, thus forever changing the acoustic, visual, and mental atmosphere of a space in its passing. This is an interesting project maybe also to talk about. It's the Haus der Kunst in Munich. We were asked by the director at the time, he's now director of the Tate Modern in London, Chris Dercon, to add a curtain in this building built in the 30s by Troost. It was in the time that Hitler was very powerful or in power, and Hitler also used this building, the main hall, the central hall, to give speeches. And this very fascist and classicistic building is one of those cultural inheritances that the German people were very ashamed of for a long time. But Chris Dercon, being a Flemish and very active mind and looking forward, said, look, this time is now over. We're going to strip all the things that hide the history of this building, and because it's actually really beautiful architecture. And the architect was not part of the whole way it was used later on. So let's strip and let's show everything. So lots of beautiful things have been recovered, but some things, like for instance, what used to be a decoration of the roof light with the swastikas had already been taken apart, and if you look now, it has become a very innocent decoration with no meaning at all. But this is actually how the main hall looks now, or looked at the time that we got the commission. And what Chris Dercon asked and his curators is, could we make curtains on both sides, on the outer sides of these columns, to create an enclosed room that they could hire or rent out for certain, or use for certain celebrations or openings or dinners, etc. And also to then, by that, creating corridors. So if you make a curtain behind here, these spaces become corridors, and actually the public comes in on this side that goes around and moves into all the exhibition spaces from there. And if you go straight, and you could walk like that, you go into another room and then into the garden and the terrace. And so we studied the situation of this space. Here's the entrance hall where you buy your ticket and you go in, and then you go around these columns, or you go just straight. And then we decided not to be too obedient and to ask ourselves what is actually more interesting. And so we made a device, design for the track that actually does not go behind all the columns, but on one side goes in front of the columns and makes a very round turn, and then goes behind the columns, and that makes a complete loop. And that was actually a very simple gesture, and with this simple gesture, the whole logistic of the classicistic architecture was, with one move, brought out of balance. So what used to be like this is now like this. And the curtain is also a projection screen. So this side of the curtain is a projection screen. The Haus der Kunst has a lot of videos and film and so on, so they can use it for projections. You can make different rooms and entrance rooms, and you can also take it away, and then you store it in the corner of the room as a kind of object. We also use the curtain to communicate information. So the lining, so on the side of the corridors, there's a print with the floor plan of the building. And of course the seams and the tops are open for air conditioning and airflow. And there is, with the fire people, we needed to make, of course, very obvious exits. All our work is, of course, fire retardant and safe, in principle. Except when it's a private house, then people can just burn, you know. But public buildings, yes. The color was also a discussion, by the way, in the Haus der Kunst, because if you see, it's very, very light gray-blue. And this was a huge shock for all the curators, because they said it has to be very, very neutral, because, you know, we're an art institution, and art needs to be respected. So your curtain cannot be very, you know, have a lot of character. And so it has to be gray. And this is, to me, always a very interesting discussion. Is gray neutral? And what gray? So we introduced a bit of blue in the gray, and after lots of discussions, it was accepted, to my great relief. You can't imagine a gray thing hanging there. Horrible. So this was a synagogue building by Search Architects in Amsterdam. It was already designed, so usually we'd like to join the architects from a very early stage, but sometimes, also with UN Studio, sometimes it's already all designed and we are asked to implement a curtain after the fact. Of course in collaboration. And it had to be very simple. The synagogue has a shul, and in that shul they needed something to protect from light, but also give privacy to the people inside, and also prevent them to look out, because the rabbis who visited us quite often said people should not be distracted by what happens outside. They have to pay attention. So we made a curtain in sections and told a story not by printing but by making little holes. The facade is on two sides of the building, both on the west and the east side. So this window has exactly the same mirroring at the opposite. And one curtain tells about the old generation, the wisdom, and all the knowledge. And on the other, so it's a huge tree in the end. And the other side, it is the young twigs, the young generation that takes over the knowledge and brings the Jewish tradition and religion and philosophy into the future. And it's made of two layers, so the light comes through and is picked up by a voile, and it spreads these little lights over the entire space and the people in it. Over time, we have come to realize that some of the spatial qualities that were introduced in architecture in the 80s and 90s, like frozen fluidity, mutability, and changeability, have been part of the history of textiles for centuries. And that the qualities that architects, thanks to the use of increasingly sophisticated software and programming, are realizing with incredible effort, can be realized without the aid of a computer and with a fraction of the time and effort with textiles. As you can see. A key discovery... Huh?
So we'll tell Zaha.
Tell Zaha. No, come on. A key discovery for Inside Outside in the past decade has been the treatment of the curtain, not in space, but the curtain as space. Where at first we saw the curtain as a flexible and soft plane, imbued with certain properties, acoustic, psychological, aesthetic, etc., we became more and more interested in the tectonic qualities and the volume of the curtain or the cloth itself. This was, for instance, for Ben van Berkel UN studio in the Mercedes-Benz Museum, an acoustic wall, and the wall is 47 meters long and 3 meters high, and we made it out of brushes. Panels, wooden panels, covered in a golden-colored metal sheen, a little layer of metal, and then bored holes, and then brushes put in like a broom, as it were, but then vertical. And what these brushes do, except of a three-dimensional effect, they of course spread the sound waves, so they don't absorb, but they scatter the waves and therefore improve the sound. Prada Epicenter. The nice thing is that we knitted one of the socks ourselves. 7 days with my assistant in the Gramercy Park Hotel. 10 by 5 meters. And we started on each other's lap, and we created these knitting things ourselves. It's a garden hose and a piece of wood with a pointed end. And we went through customs, and it was December 2001. And I don't understand, but we were not stopped. It's weird, huh? Anyway, so we went into the Gramercy Park Hotel. We ordered this very thin voile, metallic voile, and we wanted to, as we decided doing the interiors of the Prada with OMA, one of the hanging closets, which is a track system OMA designed with closets that shift position and that at night can come together and become a closed unit. One of those would be textile and very soft. So we mimicked the stretched metal with this metallic voile, and by knitting it, created a mass which was quite soft but still quite stiff, and it was to cover the audio installation. And so we started on each other's lap and knitted away from each other, and it became larger and larger, and it started to cover the entire room. So the cleaning lady really thought she was going crazy, because each day the room would be more and more covered with this knitting. And when we were done, we threw it out of the window and we put it into a taxi and then just hung it up. It's actually double sock, so it's a double layer and hung to this system. And it can shift position. And the Casa da Musica that we'd worked with OMA on for 5 or 6 years, all the interior finishes, the outside plaza, and 13 different curtains of enormous size, and all with different roles, so acoustic, absorption, darkening, view filtering, sun reflecting, etc. We also designed the cover of the wooden walls, golden enlargement of the wood grain. And this is what you see, and then you have years of testing and finding out what is necessary until you find a way to make, this is one of the curtains, development for the view filter, which should not have any acoustic effect, so working with acoustic engineers that measure everything we do, because of course the acoustics in a concert hall are extremely important. And we started by knitting and trying to find a knit that was stable enough for 22 by 17 meters, but that didn't work out, so we found a way to knot. So from knitting it became knotting into a fish net from the Dutch fishing industry, until we had the right knot for the engineers and for the production company. And it was actually, the design refers to the Catholic tradition in Porto, Portugal, which is a very Catholic country, but especially Porto. And I was brought up Catholic, and my mother went to church in Portugal when we were small. She had a black lace on her head because of, you have to cover your hair. So in Portugal, black is for married women and white for unmarried women. So they refer to that tradition. So one side has a black knotted curtain and the other side has a white knotted curtain. And this is how we go about it. We make the tests in our studio in lots of different scales and then go on site and see with the architects what is the right scale and knot and so on. And then a production company takes over. 17 people knotted 700 hours. And we registered their ways of knotting through internet. Because, of course, like knitting, everyone has a different hand. And it had to become a very, everything had to look the same, not different. So we commented on internet that a knotter should knot more loose or another knotter should knot more. In fact, they're bands of 2.5 by 17 or 22 meters, and they're connected by aluminum profiles. So you slide these bands into these profiles, and they're interconnected with cables, stainless steel cables, and they are folding into the ceiling silently, without any noise, with a motor hidden in the ceiling. So this is one of the examples why you have to collaborate with architects from the beginning, because it influences the entire building and the structure of the building. So in the end, we thought the architecture or the facade, glass facade, which was made of corrugated glass, was more like a curtain, our curtain more like walls. An integral part of the whole architecture. Etc., etc. Too many things. Come on. Chasm Museum with Machado and Silvetti. If you design within a certain context, you have to know your host and where you are. The getting to know is not only about the place and the people who work in it, but also about the wishes of the future users. The first process is always to go through all the layers of information: culture, site, climate, use, inhabitants, and of course the local flora and fauna. I think that the most exciting part of our work is this kind of anthropology, sociology, the spontaneous moments before you become a so-called designer, before you have a plan. You are a human injected somewhere, expected to create something there and then. And then each person you start working with implies a certain color palette, certain energies, preferences, or wants. The use of colors is a sensitive matter. In my country, Holland, we are used to strong primary colors like white, black, blue, yellow, green, or orange. In other cultures, these same colors might trigger emotions of resentment, shock, awe, or even fear. For instance, in Europe, we interpret white as a sign of purity, as in a Christian wedding, but in Korea, white symbolizes death, even when it is in the form of a white blooming tree. In Taipei, where we work on the interiors and landscape of the Taipei Performing Arts Center, the colors that we initially imagined for the interior of the auditoriums were rejected instantly by the local architects. Why? Because they referred to specific political parties, to the military, or to the Chinese culture of the mainland. So color can be banned for political or religious reasons because they represent the wrong parties of that moment, or death. They can be forbidden because their pigment base is considered environmentally harmful, or simply because fashion predictors and production companies decide that it is time for a change. If you look around, the colors that one saw everywhere in the 50s and 60s, the colors of Technicolor, don't exist any longer. They literally disappeared from our general color spectrum and are simply no longer produced. The concept for the Taipei building is, there are 3 different auditoriums, and the concept is now that we make all the auditoriums the same color, and completely in the same color, as if they're dipped in a bucket with paint, but of course with all kinds of different materials and structures, and all the other spaces. So this is the way we then collaborate with architects. to find the right answers and materials. And of course, an older project that you might know is the Seattle Library, where also color was one of the major ingredients of what we actually did. Of course, we designed the landscape and the interior finishes and the curtain, but the color scopes were developed from very early on for each room and each different library or staircase, a different color scope. And then, of course, you know the story that the landscape seamlessly enters, becomes a textile carpet. So it's a bit what we did in Madrid last year, but in a different way, that your nature becomes represented in textiles. They're all pictures I take myself of plants for years, all the structures and colors, changing the color. And the colors, of course, create different atmospheres psychologically. But the carpets themselves have a role for acoustic absorbency, but also place, defining place, but also showing the way to people how to get from A to B and further. And the colors of the landscape also enter the auditorium in the heart of the library, where a curtain, a two-sided curtain, is either acoustically absorbent or acoustically reflective, like here. So it's turned around when you use it as a backdrop, and then it reflects the sound. Here in the Hackney Empire Theatre in London, I wanted to tell you about color as well, because we were part of a restoration project. We sometimes work with Tim Ronald's architects from London, and hopefully in the future with other architects in the restoration of buildings. This is a building of 1895, I think, by Matcham, and it's been used and used and used until a few years ago the English Arts Council and Lottery Fund decided to restore it, and Tim Ronalds introduced us to do all the textiles in that theatre. And at first first of all, the restoration discussion is very interesting, because what is restoration? Till what moment do you go back? Do you restore something back to its original form? Well, originally this theatre was white, beige and gold, but through all the cultures and all the fashions, and Hackney is a very national area, so Chinese, Indian, African, everything is mixed, and English, of course. So actually the theatre is a cacophony of color, which you saw, sorry about this, here, cacophony of color, and so a decision was made not to go back to 1895, but to go back to respect all the input of all these cultures and fashions, but to clean it and to make it a bit more coherent. What we suggested to the architects and the Arts Council, etc., is to implement curtains in black and white. So to not go back in the tradition of red and gold, but to create a new layer, and in doing so, changing the interior into a kind of decor behind which a textile layer announces a new era. The architect was very enthusiastic about it, so are we. But the users and the managers were very doubtful. Of course, the black and white was not flat, but three-dimensional. These stripes were built up of fringes, and the fringes move with every breath of air or movement of the curtain. Our client had to think for a year, and after a year came back to us and said, I'm sorry, Ms. Blaisse, we are aware that you are a modern designer and probably quite, professional, but we cannot accept the black and white idea because our public wants to know what they're getting, and they're so used to this Hackney Empire Theatre being classic, with the red and everything, and so if you introduce something new, then we will lose our public. So we would like to keep the traditional color use and even the use of that material. So if you can't do it, but we want a red velvet curtain. But you can give back your commission, we will understand. And I said, well, it's actually quite challenging for me, so let's make a red curtain. And we thought, oh my God, how to do this? And why, and what, and how? Well, why was obvious. So we tried a lot of things, and it's a guillotine. We call it a guillotine curtain. It's a curtain that comes up and down, that disappears into the flight tower and comes down. So it doesn't have that movement that we are so used to by opening it at two sides or so. And then I had a dream of a little girl who jumped and danced, a very little girl, and she was wearing a smocked dress. I don't know if you know what smocked is, but it's pleating. You pleat the cloth and then you connect the pleats with a thread, and then it becomes like an accordion. And while she was dancing and jumping, her breath opened and closed this three-dimensional structure. So this was what we were going to do. And so we made test after test, enlarging and enlarging. And the weird thing with textile is that the scale of textile is always 1:1. You cannot, like in architecture, make a model 1:50 or 1:1000. It just doesn't work with textiles. So you have to just do it and try what you can get. So we made a smocked red velvet curtain with an irregular seam. Edge. How do you say that? Lower edge. And everyone lived happily ever after. Given programs and the expected deliverables for our interventions are as complex by now as they are for built volumes. Apart from acoustic absorption, separation, or reflection according to a meticulously detailed program, our curtains are expected to meet measurable requirements like sun reflection, temperature reduction, glare controlling, view filtering, darkening, shading, wind reduction, climatic protection or isolation, etc. They need to be fire resistant, color fast, long lasting, easy to handle, and they have to meet site specific maintenance expectations. They need to offer guarantee, sometimes even 25 years, which is completely impossible. Their weight requires specific constructions in roofs. Their trajectory impacts the design of the ceilings, the floor plan, the pattern of the transparent facades, and their storage volume influences the size and position of walls. This is a project with Seijima Nishizawa, completely scientific. All these design-ish things are thrown out. In the end, we only made the most neutral curtains you can imagine. And this was very important because, of course, it was for the glass pavilion in Toledo, and you know the ethereal architecture of Sana, and so the curtains had to be completely non-existent. So even the smallest decoration or the smallest funny idea or the smallest, percentage of creativity was too much. Literally too much. Even this little seam, I don't know if you see it. It was supposed to look like the grass was reflected in the glass, was too much. And so we worked 2.5 years with all the engineers, acoustic, structural. Seijima Nishizawa came by quite often. And the only discussions became about the pleat. The pleat being an instrument of massing up the cloth, but also influencing the climate, and therefore very, very dangerous, because as soon as you pleat, you create air tunnels, and these air tunnels collect heat and have a bad influence on the interior. But it was an extremely interesting process. We were able to design all the tracks, because as I told you in the beginning, the tracks is step one of the design. Where do these curtains go? Where are they stored? What is their effect? What do they do? So the tracks have been our design, but our design was not realized, unfortunately. But we've learned a lot. Outside, meanwhile, the garden has undergone a radical change of context, from luxurious rural country houses and palaces to inner city situations. City traffic and inhabitants interact with landscape on a daily basis, changing it from an enclosed private oasis to an open space that has become public. A shared garden for all people. a welcome relief from the defined urban living space. Yet the city park of today is no longer just an innocent piece of nature inside the urban context, made only for the distraction and health of the users, and composed to introduce a building or to bring an ode to a monument of some kind. No, it has become an important political and strategic tool with which a city triggers extra sources of income, manipulates its voting inhabitants, and organizes its infrastructure. A tool also to cover underground structures that need to stay accessible, or layers of polluted soil that may better be left untouched than transported elsewhere. This is our garden design for a park in Milan. We won the competition in 2004, and last year, 2010, we managed to have an interim contract to adjust our competition design, but also to analyze the current situation and to adapt the design. Do you have enough energy for me to tell about this project, or do you want to go quickly on? Yeah? Okay, so it's a very simple design, actually. The basis is that it connects all areas around. So different areas from the city with different program and different inhabitants, different users, different energies. Because this future garden is so central, it has to efficiently connect pedestrians from one to the other. And so we actually started to draw these lines. And of course, this is a very traditional technique. But while you do that, you also realize that it's not flat but three-dimensional, which is very important, and that a park has to be viewed and experienced from different distances and at different speeds by different users or visitors, because it's surrounded by roads and surrounded by buildings and development areas that would later be filled with big towers. If you have a web of paths, you create many irregular plots or planes, I don't know how you call it. We called it plots, I think. And all these plots are different size and different shape. And we quickly decided that it should become a botanical garden because Milan is missing out on a botanical garden. And that each of these plots should be a different kind of garden. And then you could imagine that both plots and paths can go up and down and have different functions to connect. They can become bridges or tunnels or furniture. They can be sink down and become windows into what I call the underworld. They can be water features, etc. Then we were also asked in the competition to create a few pavilions, so we collaborated also with Michael Moltzen. So our team was actually composed of inside-outside team with Mirko Zardini, an urban theoretician from Milan, who's now working in Toronto, I think. Montreal, yeah. Michael Moltzen as architect, Irma Boon, graphic designer, Piet Oudolf, planting designer, and Rodor, landscape engineers. So we had a very small group, and we were invited together with other landscape architects internationally, and we were at the first selection with 9 others, and we thought we would never win because we thought, well, you know, I always feel like an amateur. And there was Martha Schwartz and Peter Walker and Adriaan Geus.
Only 9 of them.
9 of them. So we thought, well, we'll just have fun and then we'll see. Anyway, so Michael Moltzen's team designed a few buildings, and we also decided at that moment that a building that was planned to be projected into the park, a very big volume as a fashion museum and school, would not be respected by us, but just chopped into little pieces so that we would have 3 different buildings scattered over the park instead of one huge building that would make actually the park a kind of floor mat for that building. So what you see here is different pavilions, horrible color, but on the laptop. It's beautiful. There it's very yellow. But anyway, and of course also a textile pavilion that Michael and I designed through the telephone. A cafe, children's creche, terrace building, but made of textile and imprinted with flowers. And all these buildings were, of course, an integral part of the whole path system. So paths would just enter the building, go through the building, and then down again. The paths themselves were to be completely written. So the path as an instrument for communication and information. So being a botanical garden, all the names of the plants and trees would be on the park, in the paths, designed by Irma Boom, of course. And each, of course, plot was to be a different garden. And here you see a drawing seen from above that you would have all these plants and all the names in the path. And there are different ways to do that, of course. So on top of this structure, that in themselves could have any role, any shape, any function, etc., and also level of complexity or not. We also had a nursery planned that has to do with phasing strategy, and on top of that we had confetti of circular forests. Each circular forest represents an interior, and each circular forest is built up of one kind of tree. And each tree is chosen out of the Milan city, but also its agricultural tradition. We considered these bosques as architectural volumes that you could enter and organize in different ways, and that you could use in different ways as a theater, or for relaxation, or for reading, or for concerts, etc., depending on how you would plant them and organize them. Now, this is what the site looks like right now. It's been used by developers of all the buildings around it as a building site. So it really doesn't look very promising, but it will be a park one day, and I'm very stubborn about this. We found local landscape architects to work with us, Franco Giorgetta and his team. And this is how we work. We had to analyze what was going on underneath the ground, and also the topography, the new topography, because we had to connect to new buildings by Cesar Pelli and Pei and Bueri Studio, etc., all around. This kind of technical drawings about all the heights and how we can. So this is our adjusted plan where everything is reconsidered and now connecting to the actual situations. And we have meetings every month with all the technicians and developers and municipality and Arab and so on to discuss every detail. Okay, are you still okay, or should I stop?
We probably have to stop fairly soon because people will go. You can continue, but I think we're going to lose them.
I think I'll lose you. I think we will have to have another, maybe, lecture.
That would be wonderful.
Another time.
That would be wonderful. Maybe you can go. Do you want to go through some of the images, or shall we stop and people ask a few questions? I think we really have to stop at 2.
Yeah, what time is it now?
It's now 10 to.
10 minutes.
10 to, okay, then you have to. I just go through the images and you can ask questions.
While you're going through the images, maybe just so that everyone knows, I could say a few words, and then if you want to add anything, Petra, about the curtain that you have been designing for us, so
Yes.
I think people would also be interested in that. Maybe a couple of sentences about that.
Yes.
I think some of you know that we have this major problem in terms of the division between the front part and the back part of Pipes. So when we're sitting on the risers, we have these very ugly panels. We can see over them into the other space. So for people who come to talk in the front part of Piper, it's a very cold space. in a way, because you have this sense of being in a small part of a bigger space. And for people who are listening to the lectures, they're also somehow in this strange in-between experience of space. So it seemed to us that it would be a very good idea to find a way to have the option of dividing the two spaces, or to divide the one space basically into three spaces. The space of the risers, the space of the front part, and in a way the idea of the whole space in some way. But actually,
Would be a nice place for
Petra has come up with 4 spaces, so that we have the space of the risers, the space of the main part, the space of the whole thing, and because of the way in which the curtain might also have a loop in the middle, the idea of a kind of green room or some sort of a creation of a particular space, even in the middle.
Very complex shape.
Wonderful. I feel like one of those cabaret things where we have the magician and his assistant. It's great.
I'm your assistant.
Who's the assistant?
Well, in this case, the assistant is
I'm
showing
absolutely
their
the
assistant. Anyway, I think it's fantastic. So I don't know, Petra, do you want to add anything about those things?
Well, we're here today to discuss our idea, and of course it has to have an opening. So what I liked about the loop is that it creates an extra room, indeed. And that room is about, I think, 3.5 meters. What does it say?
12 feet.
12 feet. And you can organize, I mean, I always make these kind of sketches. You can organize the curtain. You can pull it all so you have a closed loop, or you can open it in different manners. So you can create a half-open room, or just a backdrop, or you can maybe have a meeting within that loop while other things are going on, or you can organize exhibitions, etc. So what we are going to look at today is...
I just thought people would like to know
Yeah.
what, I think it's an exciting project and what's happening. But maybe we have a couple of minutes to
Yeah.
actually talk about what you said. It's very, very exciting. This is for the future, so I don't know whether Charles has some thoughts or questions, or anybody from the room.
I'll ask a question briefly just before opening up. You were very pointed about the kinds of restrictions and covenants and how seemingly emotional or irrational they can be. And I was also interested in your comments about the kinds of expectations that you face these days. I mean, I remember when I first encountered your work, the kind of shock, the kind of radical shock of, on the one hand, how straightforward and self-evident it was. Well, of course, there's a tradition of these things, and that your work can embody that tradition, but at the same moment, how radically new it was, in contrast to much of design culture.
Yeah.
But now, I'm increasingly aware, maybe have a sense that you must be under enormous, enormous pressure for a curtain, a simple curtain, to do all number of things.
Mm.
And I wonder if that's now different in your practice than it was years ago.
Yeah, it is different, but not only because of others, but also because of your own development. You so you have a development, and I think it's always the challenge, like Haus der Kunst, that it has to look really simple, but of course you want it to be able to create enough possibilities for people to really enjoy it and use it, and not too many possibilities so it will never be used. And that's what you learn, I think, in the process, being here with students, I think, is that you are sometimes much more complex in the beginning, but you realize that nobody can use it in that manner, or it's too complex to even think about. So in one hand, you have to become more and more simplified so that every new person who would use this space or building will understand it. And on the other hand, you demand more and more of yourself and of the thing as a personality or technical challenge.
You talked about two ways. You talked about 2 ways of working with architects. One is in the process of developing a building and use the curtain.
Yeah.
But the other is once the building is already there, you have to come up with an intervention. I'm pretty sure it's a very different experience, but what is the responsibility from in your behalf in those different processes towards the design?
Responsibility, well, I have no responsibility.
I mean, how do you feel on what is the difference?
Well, it's a
Your
big
personal
difference.
goal.
Well, the big difference is that if you just join, well, you can imagine the answer. If you join the process, you're part of the team and you're part of the process. It's on the one hand more difficult in the sense that you go through all the ups and downs of the architect's development of a building as well. Because, of course, things change all the time. So you develop many more things together with the architects and engineers or artists. You know, we have sometimes really huge teams. For instance, now well, I'll tell that another time. But and if you come in later, what you do is that you research the whole history in a condensed manner, because we cannot just implement something. You need to understand everything. So we have a lot of talks with the architects and study all their drawings, and all the sections, and all the plans, and all the functions, etc., until we understand it, hopefully, what we have to do. But you feel much more disconnected. So you synthetically try to become part of the whole thing. So that's the difference. It's not a different responsibility, because you have the same responsibility for the object itself in the end.
Petra, can I ask you to say something more broadly about landscape, because
Yes.
we didn't have enough.
No, we
didn't have enough
discuss.
chance, and I really hope that you'll come back another time and talk more specifically about landscape. But I don't know. I think maybe a lot of people here in the room don't know about Yves Mounier, and the fact that he was a young landscape architect that Petra and Rem worked with, and he died when he was very, very young.
Yes.
So, in a way, I think you have that experience of your collaborations, and then you have the experience of your own work with landscape, which we didn't go into so much. And I think it would be interesting if you have any thoughts now broadly around what is it that made that work, the beginnings of your own practice in landscape, different than some of the other traditions that were going on historically, specifically in terms of design. For example, Charles was mentioning the emphasis on traditions of gardening and the relationship also to plants. You're very specific about coloration and plant. There's all of we have Piet Rudolf here, teaching in landscape architecture, and I think there is something of that tradition again of the plants that he carries. I think it would be interesting if you have some general comments about this specifics of Mounier, your relationship,
Yeah.
the specifics of what makes landscape so important for you. That would be a nice thing to finish on, maybe.
Yeah. I think what Yves did was more painting with plants. And I think Piet Adolf does the same. But what Piet Adolf has started in the Netherlands is maybe what we like to do as well, is that the awareness of these plant communities as well. That you look at the natural situation of plants, and of course it's not completely like that, but the way Piet composes plant communities is a bit like inspired by prairies and that kind of thing. And what is in my text, if I would go on, is that we really miss the flowers and the plants in the landscape, that we get, more and more landscape architecture in the urban context is architectural. It's about architectural finishes and fountains and structures and compositions, however creative, but often very controlled and extremely controlled and more controlled. For safety and maintenance and budgets and so on. And so we try to reintroduce changes of season and romantic atmospheres maybe, or some form of narrative and mystery into our gardens, which is very ambitious, not because it's so ambitious intellectually, but ambitious because it's so difficult in practice. And so that's why this park in Milan, if it becomes a botanical garden, with Piet involved and with myself involved, in trying to create this miniature biotopes, more or less, which is what it is.
But in Milan you also gave it a very strong geometrical
Yes.
aspect. So the plots are still now dominated in some ways by the geometry.
Yeah,
Some
and that's
good.
to do with phasing,
Yeah.
because of course the making of a park in such a circumstances often takes years and years and years. They start, and then 5 years later they do a next step, and then 5 years later they do a next step. So the designs that we make are graphic. Why? Because from the very beginning they have to be there. And if you make it very, if it's dependent on growth or it's dependent on time, then it's not there and it will never be there. So also the communication over a distance, we also designed the gardens for the CCTV building, TVCC building in Beijing, is quite graphic because you have to communicate to people you don't know in a very large distance how to make that garden, literally how to make it, how to measure it, how to compose it, how to plant it, etc. So the more simple and the bolder your initial language is, the easier that is. And then when the planting takes over, then that graphic will fade because they will overgrow or they will become larger and larger and there will be shade and sun, So the idea is actually that in time, and of course that's one of the ambitions and demands of a garden, is that you need 50 or 100 years before it really becomes what you envision. So in our work, I always say we have two timelines. One is working with textiles, where textiles, degrade or actually decompose and start to die from the moment you hang them. And the landscape that starts, is just the beginning and need 100 years to grow. So you have these two things crossing lines.
Last question.
I'll say one quick comment here, which was, I can't tell you how many times I've sat in Piper and I've thought, I wonder if there's one wonderful, big, dramatic move that could be made here to give it a little kind of life and texture, and what could that be? And being a designer, I'm really a journalist, I thought, there must be something that could be added here. And what we did not speak about very much, but which is such a quality, the human quality, humanistic quality of these fabrics, of these textiles, the kind of life that they bring, the breath, the spirit, and might I dare say even the feminine quality that comes in with something like that in such a severe place. And I just thought I'd say, I'm so excited to hear that you're looking at that room. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Right. On that note, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.